Hello, everyone, friends. I hope you enjoy listening to and watching this interesting story. Close your eyes for a moment and let me take you back to a time when the morning light filtered through your bedroom curtains in a softer way, or so it seems now. Back to when you'd wake to the sound of your mother's voice calling up the stairs, or perhaps to the tinny buzz of an alarm clock on your nightstand. One of those wind-up kinds that you could silence with the slap of your hand. It's the 1970s, and you're a school kid again. Can you feel it? That particular mixture of reluctance and anticipation as you swing your legs out of bed, your feet touching the cool floor. Another school day is beginning, and oh, what a different world it was. The thing about those mornings, those 1970s school mornings, is how much slower everything seemed to move. There was time, somehow. Time to sit at the breakfast table with your family, even if it was just for 10 minutes. Your mother might be at the stove making eggs or pouring cereal into a bowl while your father rustled through the newspaper, that enormous ink-stained paper that seemed to take up half the table. The radio might be playing softly in the background. Maybe you'd catch the tail end of a song, something by the Carpenters or Elton John, before the news came on. And you'd eat your breakfast, maybe cornflakes or Cheerios, maybe toast with butter that melted into every corner, while your siblings argued over something trivial, something that seemed earth-shatteringly important at the time. And then you'd gather your things, your textbooks, those heavy hardbound books with the rough cloth covers, maybe a bit worn at the corners from all the students who'd used them before you. You'd stuff them into your bag, perhaps a canvas bag or a simple backpack. Nothing like the elaborate ones kids carry today, along with your notebooks, your pencils, maybe a pen or two if you were in the upper grades. Your lunch, if your mother had packed it, would be in a metal lunchbox or a brown paper bag folded at the top. Inside, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, perhaps a Twinkie or a bag of chips, and a thermos of milk or juice. Do you remember stepping outside? The air had a different quality then, or perhaps it's just the way memory sweetens things. If it was autumn, there'd be that crispness, that smell of leaves and distant wood smoke. If it was spring, the softness of warming earth and the sound of birds in the trees. And you'd head off to school, maybe walking in with neighborhood friends, meeting at the usual corner, or maybe waiting for the yellow school bus, that iconic vehicle with its squeaky door and its driver who knew every kid by name. The bus rides were a world unto themselves, weren't they? The vinyl seats, slightly sticky in summer, cold in winter. The way the bus bounced over bumps, sending everyone lurching forward. The older kids always claimed the back seats. That was their territory, their domain, while the younger ones sat closer to the front, under the watchful eye of the driver. And the noise, the constant chatter, the laughing, the occasional argument that would flare up and die down just as quickly. Some kids would be finishing homework at the last minute, their papers balanced on their knees, pencils scrawling frantically. Others would be trading baseball cards or comic books, making deals and negotiations that seemed as serious as any business transaction. And then you'd arrive. The school building, whether it was brick or stucco, one story or several, had a presence that's hard to describe to anyone who didn't experience it. It was imposing in its way, but also familiar, almost like a second home. You'd file off the bus with everyone else, joining the stream of students heading toward the entrance. And there was always that moment, just before you went inside, when you'd see your friends, when someone would call your name, when the day would begin to take shape. Inside, the hallways had a particular smell. Floor wax and chalk dust, old paper and that indefinable scent that every school building seems to have. The lockers lined the walls, those tall, narrow metal boxes with their combination locks that never quite worked smoothly. You'd spin the dial to your first number, left past 0 to your second number, right again to your third, and pull. Sometimes it would open on the first try, often it wouldn't, and you'd have to start over, fingers working the dial while you kept one eye on the clock, hoping you wouldn't be late to homeroom. The classrooms themselves were sanctuaries of a sort, each one with its own personality shaped by the teacher who presided over it. The desks were arranged in neat rows, those sturdy wooden or metal desks with the chairs attached, or sometimes separate chairs that scraped against the linoleum floor when you stood up or sat down. At the front of the room, the teacher's desk, larger and more substantial, a fortress of authority, and behind it the blackboard, that wide expanse of dark green or black slate where lessons unfolded in white or yellow chalk, where homework assignments were written in the corner, where the day's date was noted in that neat, teacherly handwriting. The teachers of the 1970s, they were different from today's teachers. Not better or worse necessarily, but different. They commanded respect in a way that was simply understood. When Mrs. Henderson or Mr. Patterson spoke, you listened. Not out of fear exactly, though there was a healthy awareness of consequences if you misbehaved. No, it was more than that. It was a kind of natural order, a social contract that everyone acknowledged. Teachers were authority figures, yes, but many of them were also mentors, guides, people who genuinely cared about their students even if they didn't always show it in overt ways. Think about your favorite teacher for a moment. Can you picture them? Maybe it was the English teacher who introduced you to poetry and made you see that words could be beautiful, not just functional. Maybe it was the science teacher who performed demonstrations that seemed like magic, mixing chemicals that changed colors, showing you how electricity flowed through a circuit. Maybe it was the history teacher who told stories of the past as if they'd been there themselves, making dates and names and battles come alive in a way that textbooks never could. And the lessons themselves, they unfolded at a different pace. There were no computers on every desk, no tablets, no instant access to information. If you needed to research something, you went to the library, that quiet sanctuary with its card catalog and its rows of books. You'd flip through the wooden drawers of the card catalog, searching for your subject, writing down call numbers on a scrap of paper, then wandering the stacks until you found what you needed. You'd check out books, the librarian stamping the due date card with that satisfying thunk, and you'd carry them home, feeling their weight in your arms. In class, learning was an active, participatory experience. The teacher would lecture, yes, writing key points on the blackboard, and you'd copy them into your notebook, your hand moving across the page, the scratch of pencil on paper, a constant background sound. But there was also discussion, real discussion, where the teacher would pose a question and hands would shoot up around the room, students eager to share their thoughts. There were no smartphones to distract you, no notifications pulling your attention elsewhere. When you were in class, you were fully present, for better or worse. Math class had its own particular character. The teacher would work problems on the board, step by step, and you'd follow along in your textbook or on your paper. When you got stuck, you'd raise your hand and wait, sometimes for what felt like an eternity, until the teacher could come to your desk and lean over your shoulder, pointing out where you'd gone wrong. See here, they'd say, tapping the paper with a finger or the eraser end of a pencil. This is where you made your mistake. Try it again. And you would, erasing and rewriting until the numbers made sense. English class meant reading aloud, taking turns going around the room, each student standing and reading a paragraph or a page from whatever novel or story you were studying. To Kill a Mockingbird, perhaps, or The Outsiders, or poetry by Robert Frost. Your heart would pound when you knew your turn was coming, hoping you wouldn't stumble over any words, hoping your voice wouldn't crack or waver. And when it was someone else's turn, you'd follow along in your own book. Or sometimes you'd let your mind wander, gazing out the window at the trees swaying in the breeze, at the clouds moving across the sky. Science class often meant lab work, and those were special days. You'd pair up with a partner, and the teacher would distribute materials, beakers and test tubes, Bunsen burners, specimens to examine. There was always a sense of contained excitement during labs, a feeling that something unexpected might happen. Sometimes it did, a chemical reaction that fizzed more than anticipated, a frog dissection that made someone turn green and have to leave the room, a minor mishap that would be retold at lunch and remembered for years. And speaking of lunch, oh, the lunchroom. What a social landscape that was. The cafeteria with its long tables and attached benches. The industrial kitchen at one end where lunch ladies in hairnets and aprons serve food from metal trays. The smell of that cafeteria food is something you probably remember even now. The particular aroma of fish sticks on Fridays, the sweetness of canned peaches, the mystery of exactly what was in the sloppy joes. If you bought lunch, you'd stand in line with your tray, sliding it along the metal rail, choosing chocolate milk or white milk, taking your roll, receiving your main dish and your sides. The lunch ladies would dish out portions with practiced efficiency, and you'd pay your dollar or two, then navigate the social complexity of finding a place to sit. Where you sat mattered. It was tribal in a way. The jocks at one table, the band kids at another, the quiet, studious types in their corner, the popular kids holding court in the center. And you'd find your people, your group, and slide onto the bench beside them, ready to eat and talk and laugh. The conversations at lunch were about everything and nothing. Weekend plans and homework frustrations, crushes and rejections, who was dating whom, who'd broken up, the latest episode of whatever show everyone was watching, Happy Days or the Brady Bunch or Emergency. There was a casualness to those conversations, an ease that came from being among friends, from being in that in-between space where you weren't quite in class but weren't yet free for the day. And then there was recess or gym class, that blessed release of physical energy. Outside, if weather permitted, running and playing, games of kickball or dodgeball, jumping rope or playing tetherball. Or in the gym, if it was raining or cold, the squeak of sneakers on the polished floor, the echo of shouts and bouncing balls, the particular humiliation of being chosen last for a team, or the pride of being chosen first. Gym teachers were a breed apart, often gruff, always energetic, usually carrying a whistle that they'd blow to get your attention, the sharp tweet cutting through the noise. The school day had its rhythms, its patterns. Morning classes when you were fresh and alert, or supposed to be. The mid-morning slump when time seemed to slow to a crawl, when the clock on the wall barely moved. The anticipation before lunch, the drowsy contentedness after. The afternoon classes when the light would slant through the windows differently, when you could feel the end of the day approaching, when your thoughts would begin to drift toward home, toward freedom. Between classes, the hallways would surge with life. Locker doors slamming, voices calling out, the occasional running footsteps followed by a teacher's sharp, "No running in the halls." Quick exchanges with friends, plans made for after school, homework assignments compared. That moment of panic when you'd realize you'd forgotten to study for a test or hadn't finished an assignment that was due next period. Some of you might remember the special assemblies, those times when the whole school would gather in the auditorium or gymnasium. Maybe it was for a visiting speaker or a film strip presentation or a school play. The excitement of breaking routine, of sitting with your classmates in the semi-darkness, whispering and giggling, until a teacher would give you the look and you'd settle down, at least for a while. In tests, how different they were then. No multiple choice bubble sheets fed into machines. Instead, tests were often written by hand, essay questions that required thought and articulation, or problems worked out in full, showing your steps. The teacher would walk up and down the aisles while you worked, hands clasped behind their back or arms crossed, watchful for any wandering eyes or suspicious movements. The stress of tests was real, that tightness in your stomach, the hope that you'd studied enough, that you'd remember what you needed to remember. Report card day was momentous. Those small paper cards filled out by hand or typed, listing your grades in each subject, comments from teachers about your performance and behavior. You'd carry that report card home in your backpack, sometimes with pride, sometimes with dread, knowing your parents would examine it closely, would praise you or express disappointment, would perhaps post it on the refrigerator, or have a talk with you about applying yourself more. The friendships you made during those years, they were forged in a different crucible than friendships are formed today. Without social media, without constant digital contact, your friendships existed primarily in person, face to face. You'd spend time together at school, yes, but also after school and on weekends. You'd ride bikes through the neighborhood, meet at the park, gather at someone's house to watch TV or play board games or just talk. There was an intensity to those friendships, a depth that came from giving each other your full attention, from being truly present with one another. And crushes. Oh, the sweet agony of having a crush in the 1970s. The longing glances across the classroom, the elaborate note-passing networks where folded pieces of paper would make their way from desk to desk, person to person, until they reached their intended recipient. Do you like me? Check yes or no. The nervousness of slow dances at school dances, the lights dimmed, the music playing, maybe Color My World by Chicago or I'll Be There by the Jackson 5, and you'd gather your courage to ask someone to dance or wait, hoping someone would ask you. School dances were events. The gymnasium or cafeteria transformed with crepe paper streamers and balloons, a makeshift DJ set up in the corner, chaperones lining the walls. The girls in their dresses or bell-bottom pants and peasant blouses, the boys in their best jeans and button-up shirts, or maybe even a suit jacket if it was a formal dance. The awkwardness of those early dances, before anyone got comfortable, before the dancing really started, and then later in the evening when inhibitions had loosened, the floor crowded with moving bodies, the music loud enough to feel in your chest. Field trips were treasured escapes from routine, loading onto buses, everyone chattering with excitement, heading to a museum or a historical site or a science center. Teachers would try to maintain order, to keep the group together, but there was always a sense of adventure, of being out in the world rather than confined within classroom walls. The bus ride itself was part of the fun, singing songs, playing games, someone inevitably getting carsick. As the school year progressed, certain landmarks stood out. The autumn excitement of a new beginning, fresh school supplies and new clothes. Halloween, when you might wear your costume to school, or at least to the school parade or party. Thanksgiving break, that brief respite. The approach of winter and Christmas, the decorations going up in classrooms, the anticipation building. Valentine's Day, when you'd exchange cards with classmates, often those pre-printed cards from the drugstore that you'd sign and distribute to everyone in class. Spring arriving finally after what seemed like an endless winter, the return of warm weather and outdoor activities. And then the countdown to summer. Those final weeks of school when focus became nearly impossible, when the warm breezes through open windows whispered of freedom, of long days with nothing to do but play. Final exams and projects, the last push of academic effort. Yearbook signings, passing your yearbook around the classroom, collecting signatures and messages from classmates. Have a great summer. You're really nice. Stay cool. The inside jokes and the heartfelt notes from close friends, the awkwardness of deciding what to write in someone else's yearbook. And finally, the last day. That glorious last day of school, the energy in the building electric, barely contained. Teachers giving up on trying to teach anything substantial, maybe playing a movie or having free time. The final bell ringing and the explosion of students into the hallways, into the sunshine. Books abandoned, worksheets flying, everyone shouting and laughing. Summer stretched ahead like an infinite sea of possibility. But even in summer's freedom, part of you would sometimes think of school. You'd miss certain friends you wouldn't see as often. You'd wonder who your teacher would be next year, what your class schedule would look like. And as August wound down and September approached, there'd be that mixture of emotions again, reluctance at summer's end, but also a kind of anticipation, a readiness to return, to begin again. Those school years in the 1970s shaped you in ways both obvious and subtle. The lessons you learned weren't just academic, though certainly you learned math and science, history and literature. You learned how to navigate social hierarchies, how to deal with authority, how to make friends and sometimes lose them. You learned about fairness and unfairness, about success and failure, about perseverance and adaptation. You learned who you were in some fundamental ways, tested and tried in that crucible of classrooms and hallways, playgrounds and cafeterias. The world was different then, simpler in some ways, more complicated in others. There was no internet to connect you instantly to information and people. No cell phones to keep you in constant contact with friends and family. No social media to curate your image and compare yourself to others. Life moved at a human pace. Relationships developed slowly, face to face. Learning required patience and persistence. You couldn't just Google an answer, and perhaps that made it more precious somehow. The waiting, the working, the earning of knowledge and friendship and experience. Nothing was instant. Everything required time and effort. And maybe that's why those memories glow so warmly now, why they feel so rich and full, because they were lived fully, in the moment, without the distraction of devices, without the ability to document every second for posterity. Those school days are long past now. The buildings you attended might still stand, or they might have been torn down and replaced. The teachers who shaped you have retired, and some have passed on. Your classmates have scattered across the country, across the world, living their own lives, raising their own families. You're not that child anymore, not that teenager navigating the complexities of school and growing up. But those experiences remain part of you. They're woven into the fabric of who you became. The confidence or insecurity you developed, the interests that were sparked, the values that were instilled, they all trace back, at least in part, to those formative years in American schools in the 1970s. And maybe that's what nostalgia really is. Not just a longing for the past, but a recognition of how that past shaped the present. A acknowledgement that those days, challenging as they sometimes were, frustrating as they could be, were also precious. They were your days, your experiences, your life unfolding in real time, rich with possibility. So as you sit here now, wherever you are, whatever your life has become, take a moment to honor those school years. The good days and the hard ones, the triumphs and the failures, the friendships and the heartbreaks. They were all part of the journey, all necessary chapters in your story, and perhaps, just perhaps, they were exactly what they needed to be. A time of learning and growing, of discovering and becoming, set in a world that seems, from this distance, touched with a gentler light, wrapped in the soft glow of memory and time. Those were the days, your days, school days in the 1970s, forever held in the amber of remembrance, forever a part of who you are.